Hello everybody, welcome back to Off Mess and Musings. I'm your host Itan, and today we're going to be talking about Warhammer Fest still. This is going to be the last of my videos on Warhammer Fest. This is about the tournament itself. We're going to do the tournament report. We had 55 players come down to Manchester a couple of weeks ago. We played 4 rounds of Warcry. We had people from all over the place. We had people from Europe, people from Norway. We had people come in. I think there was a couple of Americans who came in. So yeah, it was a really good event. Probably, I think, one of the biggest events of Warcry that's happened ever, and we're going to go over it. We're going to talk about the lists, we're going to talk about the meta, we're going to talk about what people brought, how they placed, and how the tournament itself was as a whole. So without further ado, let's get going. First up, we have the battle plans, the actual missions that were played. Like I said, it was 4 rounds. Game 1 was Power Struggle with the secondary Early Grave. Just as a reminder, Early Grave is the mission where you have to kill your opponent's leader, and depending on where in the game you killed them, turn 1, 2, 3, or 4, you get a different amount of points. Game 2 was Supremacy, so we're talking about 6 objectives, and there was Strong Arm the Competition. We were using the old version that was in the first version of the Rumble Pack. So if you had more wounds in the center of the battlefield than your opponent, at the end of each turn, you pick up 3 points. I feel like this was a nice counter to Supremacy because there were 6 objectives going on, so it gave smaller, more elite warbands a little bit of a boost. Round 3, we were playing Spoils of War. So Spoils of War, just as a reminder, is the mission where if you hold an objective, for an action point, you can burn the objective and get additional victory points, but remove that objective from the battlefield. And we were playing Stolen Wares, so you place down 3 treasure tokens onto the battlefield, and at the end of the game, whoever has those treasure tokens gets 2 points per token. And round 4, it was Tides of Battle with Predator and Prey. Predator and Prey is the secondary where each player picks one of their opponent's fighters, and at the end of the turn, if that fighter is near an objective, holding treasure, or dead, that player gets an additional 2 victory points. If we go back to a previous video, I made a bunch of predictions about the event itself, what would be there, and what you would need to win. So just as a recap of that, I said that the 3 biggest, most represented warbands are going to be Soulblight Gravelords, Stormcast Eternals, and Destruction Soup. And I said that to win the meta, or to win the event, you're going to need to be playing a warband that has answers to at least 2 of the 3 warbands listed here. Because it is a Rumble Pack event, you're also going to need a decent amount of fighters in your warband, at least 8 I recommended, probably very efficient chaff killing, and if you manage to bring all of that, then you'd have a really good chance at least going 3-1 and possibly taking the top spot of the event itself. And if we go back to what I was talking about, I said that Kharadron Overlords are probably going to be the warband that you want to bring. I've just got a sample KO list here. This is what I would have brought if I was bringing Kharadron Overlords. It's got a lot of fighters, so it's got good numbers for the objective missions. It's got Fight for Profit, which is a really great force multiplier and really gives your mortars or Aether Cannons, if you choose to bring them, the ability to chew through enemy fighters at range. You have your shooting fighters that can effectively stick on one objective and shoot opposing fighters off of other objectives while your Argonaut company kind of does their job. And yeah, of course, there is space for Calthea Zandai if you want to take her to further kind of compound your shooting. So that's what I said would happen, and that's what I said you should bring, and this is what there actually was. So looking at the participation, this is all the warbands that participated. I've got an extra column on the end for Destruction Soup, and you can see that the big 3 that I was talking about, Soulblight Gravelords, Stormcast Eternals, and Destruction Soup, were all pretty much the highest participants in the event, with 5, 4, and 5 players respectively. What I didn't see was Chaos Legionnaires being as popular as they are. They had another 5 players, which out of the 55 to actually participated in the event is actually quite significant. It's a good amount. I did say, though, if we go back to my meta video, that Legionnaires were they were quite popular. They were the 7th most popular warband before Warhammer Fest. So I guess the next time I do one of these videos, that'll kind of bump them up in the standings. So maybe Legionnaires are something that you're going to need to look out in the future. Going on to how those warbands did, I've got here average tournament points. And we can see with the red dotted lines, it's split up by the amount of scores that you would have. So the lowest bracket is no wins, second is 1 win, 2, 3, and 4 respectively. You need 16 points to go 3 and 1. And I think for our purposes, that's where things are most interesting for us. And we've got a number of warbands that managed to go 3 and 1. We've got Hunters of Huanchi. There were 2 participants, and their average tournament points was 16, which is very good. It effectively meant that both of the Hunters players managed to score 3 and 1 during the event. We've got 2 Caradron Overlord players. They scored just over 16, so that means that those 2 would have scored 3 and 1 or better during the event, which is very good for them. Then we've got Khorne Bloodbound, Rotmire Creed, they had 1 participant each. Just skipping forward a little bit, to Scions of the Flame had 1 participant. Seraphon, the 1 Seraphon player, managed to go 4 and 0, which was very good. And then the most interesting thing here is the Soulblight Gravelord spike. You can see it's just over 16 points, and there were 5 Soulblight Gravelord players. So this means that over those 5 players, their average score was 17 points, meaning effectively all of them managed to score 3 and 1 or better during the event. What this effectively means is that none of them placed outside of the top 16. We're talking about the top 16. Here is what we have. First place Soulblight Gravelords Michael Appleton, Alan Bevan, Demons of Nurgle, and Andrew Firth, who I've already mentioned with his Seraphon list. Those 3 lists managed to go with no losses. If there was a 5th round, and I was calling for a 5th round, then there's the possibility of getting an overall winner, depending on what would have happened in the pair down, if that was the way they were going to look at it. Ian Adkins, Caradron Overlords, like I said, very good. You can bring them if you wanted to try and top the meta that we're seeing in the UK. Then we have 3 Soulblight Gravelord players. I managed to come 8th place with my Hunters of Huanchi, 3 wins, 1 loss, which is very good. Slaves to Darkness, Khorne Bloodbound, Cities of Sigmar, which is pretty nice. Then we have Rotmire Creed, again, Hunters of Huanchi, 3 and 1. Very good. Looks like everything that I've been calling for and basically been banging on about for the last 6 months seem to have worked for the 2 Hunters players. Another Caradron Overlords player, Iron Golems, and Soulblight Gravelords. Like we saw in the last section, we've got the 5 Soulblight Gravelord players. They all managed to come at least 3 and 1 or higher. And we've got the 2 Caradron Overlords players that participated. They managed to capitalize on the strengths of their warband and really managed to place quite well, I think. Overall, if we're looking at my predictions as a whole, we definitely saw the prevalence of those top 3 warbands that I mentioned. We definitely saw the fact that Soulblight Gravelords was essentially the warband to beat, and we also definitely saw that the Caradron Overlords was probably the team designed to beat them. So going forward into the lists, I'm going to go through all of the 3 and 1 lists here. There are 16 of them, so we're going to check it out. First place, we have Soulblight Gravelords, like I said. We've got the Vargoyle, Abhorrent Arc Regent. So this comes from Flesh Eater Courts. The Arc Regent is there effectively because it's got an AoE movement buff, which can be really capitalized by the Graveguard and the Skeletons. We've got a Direwolf, a bunch of Graveguard with different weapons, mostly with great weapons, and 1 with shield, 3 skeletons with spear, and 2 zombies. I think we're going to see a lot of variety in Soulblight Gravelord's lists going forward, and I think that's really just down to the strength of the faction as a whole. I've said in other videos that it's pretty difficult to go wrong if you have 40-point chaff that you can just fill out your warband with, especially in the Rumble Pack, where you don't necessarily need to kill your opponents in order to win. And effectively, where if you manage to bring 10, 11, 12 fighters, you can kind of you can win those missions just off the back of that, out of your maneuverability and your ability to just gum up the board. And I think that's something that Michael has really shown with his list. Demons of Nurgle, this is Alan's Chimera list, Sloppy Piper, Plague Bearers. I've spoke at length about this list. I spoke about it in my last video, I spoke about it in my previous videos. So instead of just going over what I said again, I'm going to revert back to me from a month ago, and he can explain it. So yeah, go me. We've all seen this list. It's an example of probably one of the best lists in the game right now. It's one of the very few lists that are still able to bring a monster and put bodies on the field. recently went 4-0 at Adepticon. And playing against it, ideally what you're going to need is probably 2 main damage dealers. One to go after the Plague Bearers, and one to really keep that Chimera in check. But what I do want to say is that this list is very highly terrain dependent. Warhammer World terrain itself is about 1.5 to twice as dense as your typical starter set. And with that kind of density, the Chimera kind of just loses places to go and loses places to land. So a more numerous warband might be able to zone it out a little bit easier, and that gives opponents a little bit of an easier time against it. But if the Chimera is on the board on turn 1, it can really dominate because it's got the time and it's got the space to get to those places and sit on objectives, use Dragon Maul, use its ridiculous strength just to knock out whatever fighters come in. Alright, thank you, pass me. Yeah, that's all there is to say about the list. Third place, Andrew Firth. We are talking about Seraphon here. Interesting thing, it's using the Starblood Stalkers, mainly. We've got the Saurus Knight Alpha, and we have the Saurus Oldblood, adding a lot of punch to the Starblood Stalkers. The Knight Alpha gives a little bit of extra speed, but it can use its jaw attack to really get a big old spike of damage. Outside of that, it's got what looks like the full Starblood Stalkers. We've got Clacktrock, we've got Kixie Taka the Diviner, Huachi, Tok, Otterpaddle, and Zepik adding in extra bodies. Fourth place, we have the first of our Arcanauts. We have 2 Arcanaut Admirals here, an Endrin Master, a pair of Thunderers with Aether Cannon, and 4 Privateers. The Aether Cannons are an interesting choice for me. I said previously that they scale very well with Fight for Profit because they only have 1 attack to begin with, and then with Fight for Profit they can go up to potentially 3 attacks with the incredibly good damage profile. So I guess that's why Ian took them in this case. We have 9 fighters in this warband, so a little bit smaller than I would have expected. Maybe you don't need the 2 admirals and the Endrin Master. Possibly 1 admiral might be good enough. But with the 2, you have the ability to babysit each Aether Cannon with an admiral for themselves, just in case you're not going to be in position to do everything that you need to do. The Endrin Master, as a reminder, has the dirigible suit, so a little bit like the Mizzen Master, but it's got the better shooting attack with a 2-5-3-6 damage profile. So we're really looking at range here, with a lot of the warband able to really sit on objectives, pick off enemy fighters on other objectives, and with the additional speed from the Endrin Master, kind of jump out and then go and get objectives once they've wiped them out due to their shooting. Fifth place, we have Dimitrios with his Soulblight Gravelords again. NES Curseborn and Prince Duval are from the Crimson Court. We've got Vargskier, Necromancer, bunch of skeletons, bunch of Graveguard, with different kinds of weapons. So we have 2 with great weapons and 1 with shield. I actually played Dimitrios in my second round. It was my only loss. It was a pretty tough game from what I remember. That, even though skeletons with spears are only swinging with 2 attacks, they've got the 1-4 spike damage on their crit, which makes them actually quite dangerous when they start to gang up on you. Of course, we've got the Graveguard with their 2-4 damage profile. And then we have a bunch of support characters in Prince Duval and the Necromancer, and some more punch from the Vargskier, and a bunch of chaff clearing from NES. All round, I think it is a very balanced list. Again, it's got 11 fighters, so it's well suited to doing pretty well in the Rumble Pack. Sixth place, we have more Soulblight Gravelords. This time, lots of skeletons. 2 Graveguard, the Skeleton Champion, that's 12, and then another 3 guys to push the warband size up to 15. Interesting inclusion of a Kosogi Night Guard, which you don't really tend to see. They don't have that many attacks, but they are fairly tanky with a good amount of wounds and a fairly small profile on the battlefield, so you can kind of use it to anchor one of your objectives if that's what you need. And again, White King and Necromancer. So we're looking at the full-blown 15-man Soulblight Gravelord list here. It will just be able to swarm those 6 objective missions and win through attrition. Seventh place, we have more Soulblight Gravelords. We've got more of the Crimson Court. Crimson Court seems to be fairly popular. They're very nice sculpts, so I don't begrudge anyone who wants to actually bring them to their games. Prince Duval, Gorath, Valis von Fane, and NES, the full Crimson Court. Then we've got the other Warhammer Underworld's Soulblight Gravelord team, the Sepulchral Guard, with the Prince of Dust, the Champion, Harvester, and the Petitioners. So it looks like this player effectively was mainly a Warhammer Wars player, and they just put together their two Soul Blight teams into what was ultimately a fairly effective list. The petitioners with sword, they have the minion rune marks, so they're able to be brought back to life through the champion and Prince Duval. There's more than enough chaff clearing in there, and yeah, we're still looking at 11 models, which does give the team an advantage in these missions, especially with the ability to, like I said, bring back the petitioners once they die. 8th place, we have me. I managed to do it with the Hunters of Huanchi. This is the build that I was using in the previous event. So just to recap, we got the Alpha with Club, the Mizzen Master, Skink with Club, Kixie Taka, Otter Paddle, and 5 Claws. One thing I want to say about the Mizzen Master, I always felt like I was misplaying the Mizzen Master. It's got a really good melee profile. So good that you kind of want it in there and fighting things, but it's only got 20 wounds, so defensively it's not all that great. And on top of that, it's got the Fight for Profit ability. So on the one hand, you want it to sit back and you want it to buff your shooting from Kixie Taka, Otter Paddle, and your claws. But on the other hand, you want to utilize its melee profile to its fullest. So I always felt like I was playing it wrong, but maybe that's just down to me not having enough practice with the warband and recognizing when to push the Mizzen Master in and when to keep it back. I've got some changes to this list coming in the future, but yeah, I think overall this is a very solid example of Hunters. It kind of does everything you want it to do, and it's pretty good, again, in the Rumble Pack because it's got its 10 guys. The Mizzen Master definitely adds that punch that it didn't have beforehand and really gives it the ability to threaten the kind of more powerful targets that otherwise your tiny claw shooting wouldn't be able to do. 9th place, we have Chaos. We've got Chaos Lord, Aspiring Champion, Parachosen, and 3 Chaos Warriors. This is an interesting one. It's only 7 guys, so you wouldn't necessarily expect it to be very strong in the Rumble Pack, especially with, we've seen it, 10, 11, 12-man warbands running around. But I guess the damage output of the Warriors and the Chosen, Aspiring Champion, and of course the Chaos Lord, he's very choppy, managed to hold out. We did have 2 6 objective missions that we were playing, so it would have been nice to see exactly how this managed to fare in those missions. Maybe it was just a case of doubling up onto 3 or onto 4 objectives and just knocking out anyone anyone who came close. 10th place, we've got Khorne, we've got the Slaughter Priest, which is very good with its pull attack, especially on those smaller objective missions where you can pull key pieces about into your Khorne models and just really have them ruin your day. Triple Blood Reaver, very cheap chaff, always welcome. Centaurian Marshal. Now the Marshal it's not the most point sufficient thing in the world, but it's a fan favorite because it looks really cool and it's very thematic. So I can understand why he took the Marshal. It's got decent damage output. It's got 3-inch range when it's using its net, 2-inch range otherwise. So yeah, I think it can definitely do what you want it to do without necessarily putting a monster on the battlefield. And then we have a bunch of Blood Warriors, one with Glaive, one with Axe and Fist, and one with 2 axes. 11th place, we have Dan. This is the Cities of Sigmar list. So what we see is a lot of Ironbreakers. We're playing Tempest Eye, so that gives the Warden King the movement buff, which really helps get around that movement 3 off of those Ironbreakers. An Achelian King to give it the much needed reach and range threat that the Warband would otherwise lack. But in reality, this warband is all about those 9 Ironbreakers that you're bringing. They are 60 points chaff models, toughness 5, which is very tanky, 12 wounds, so they're going to stick around for a long time. And in combat, they're average for what you would expect a chaff model to have. 3-3-1-3 damage profile. We've got the Bulwark rune mark, which opens up a couple of interesting abilities for them. But yeah, it just really goes to show, if you put 2 or 3 Ironbreakers onto objective, they are not being shifted anytime soon. Everyone's basically going to be wounding on 5s. And with that 12 wounds, it even makes it a difficult prospect for something like a Varangard, for example, to one-shot them if the Varangard moves in and only has 1 attack. Next, we have Rotmire Creed. So this looks like 2-box Rotmire Creed. It's got 2 Witherlords, 2 Bloated Ones, and a bunch of Outcasts. I've talked about Rotmire Creed a lot in the past. If you want to check out my how to play on them, I will put the link in the description below, and you'll be able to see it up there. Witherlords are, of course, very efficient for their points, along with the bloated ones. So you get a lot of damage potential just in those 4 models. He's chosen mostly outcasts with shields. Either he didn't have any more points to play around with more outcasts with weapons, or he felt that shields would be appropriate given the field that he was expecting to face, which is ultimately a lot of strength 3 stuff if we're playing Soulblight Gravelords. So having them wound you on 5s as opposed to 4s is probably a little... it's a small boost, but I think it's one that might be worth it. Then we have Ferran. He came 13th, again, with Hunters of Huanchi. I played Ferran in the first round. I talked about this a little bit in the vlog. It's 1-box Hunters of Huanchi with an additional Huanchi's Claw that was converted. So we've got the Alpha with Moonstone Club, Double Claw, Triple Terrorwing to give speed, 1 Hornblower, Triple Skink with Club, and Triple Skink with Dart Pipe. It's 13-man warband, so is automatically going to be pretty good on the 6 objective missions. The Hunters of Huanchi reaction lends itself very well to keeping out of danger without necessarily having to kill your opponents. And with things like the Terror Wings, you can run into your opponent's fighters, gum them up at the end of your turn, and then waste their actions on the next turn in trying to kill the Terror Wings, and then waste even more actions with the Hunter's reaction to run away. 14th place, we have Secret Daughters of Cain. So, Trails, sorry for butchering your name. He said, yeah, in reality, this was a Daughters of Cain list. It's basically a ton of Kharadron Overlord privateers with a company captain and 2 Gorgai. Gorgais themselves, I've got their stats here. They are very good at killing chaff. They got the 6 attacks with 2-inch range, with strength 4 at 2-4 damage. So they will chew through most things. They've got the movement 7, which is also very good. It makes them faster than average. And defensively, they're not terrible. Again, with that 2-inch range, they can kind of keep out of trouble for the most part. 25 wounds will keep them alive for a couple of rounds. Now, the reason why we see privateers here and we aren't seeing just normal Daughters of Cain is that Daughters really struggle at the moment. Their basic units really pay for that movement 5 that they have. I think they're 65 points, but they only have 8 wounds. They only have toughness 3. And sure, they got movement 5, but mostly they have a 1-3 damage profile with a bunch of attacks. So it's not really something that you would want to play unless you have big chunky units acting as your distractions, kind of backing you up here. Which is, again, it's why he chose to play Kharadron Overlords as the core of the list and just ally the Gorgais in to do what the privateers can't. And finally here we've got the last 2 3-in-1 lists. We have Iron Golems, so Dominar and a ton of Iron Legionaries. They're very efficient for the points you're paying. Allied in, we have a Slaughter Priest for the pull and a True Blood for the net. So overall, it's a very balanced warband, I think. It can kind of do a little bit of everything. It's got some utility in there. It's got chaff in there. It's got a little bit of damage in there. So it's very well balanced. Finally, we have the last Soulblight Gravelord list. We've got Vampire Lord, Vargeist, King Morlack, Velmorn. So we're playing the Sons of Velmorn here. Looks like we have all of them. So we've got King Morlack, Jedron, Thane, Helmar, and Folk. I've talked about them before. Again, they are very good. They're very efficient for the points that you're paying. And they managed to escape the recent FAQ for Resurrection. So Thane, Helmar, and Folk, despite being Graveguard and Graveguard style models, they didn't get the special rune mark, which means they only come back with the amount of wounds that are on the dice. So every time you resurrect these 3, they come back with their 4 wounds, which is a really big boost for them. And finally, we got a couple of skeletons with Blaze just to bring up the numbers. So I've talked about the top 16 already. Here are the final standings for whoever might want it. We have the top 25, the remaining to bring us up to the 55 players. I think overall, as an event, it was pretty good. It was 4 rounds, like I said. I think it could have really benefited from the 5th round because we did have those 3 undefeated players at the end. It's not like there wasn't time. We probably ended on that day with a good solid 2 hours to go until the end of Warhammer Fest. So they could have run that 5th round, and I think it would have just really, for an event of this size, given a nice overall winner, which is always something that we like to see. As for Warhammer Fest itself, it was fine. If you want to see my review of the event, review of the day, and my quick run-through of Warhammer Fest, I'm going to put the link in the description below from my vlog. It's short, but it kind of goes into a little bit more detail about my thoughts for how the event was run, how Warhammer Fest was run, what I expected, that kind of thing. And yeah, like I've said, I'd like to see more of these really big convention-style tournaments, just ones that really can attract the amount of players that this did. Maybe even more in the future. Hopefully, Games Workshop has kind of got the point now that Warcry is a relatively popular game, and people will travel to their tournaments if they run them. So yeah, come on, Games Workshop, give me more events and I will happily go. But yeah, that's it. That's it from me for today. That is the last of my Warhammer Fest coverage. I hope you enjoyed all of that stuff. It was really fun for me to put all this stuff together, go to the events, go to Warhammer Fest itself, meet people. The community, as always, is fantastic. It was really good to put some faces to the names that you see on Discord and on Reddit, that kind of thing. And yeah, happy to go to more. But that's it. That's it from me for today. If you like what you saw, as always, please do not forget to like and subscribe. And let me know. Let me know in the comments below if you were there, what you thought of Warhammer Fest itself. If you're at the event, if you have any comments on any of the lists that were there, anything you think we could have done better, and any feedback you might have for me just on my videos, anything that I can do better. So yeah, with that, it's goodbye from me, and I will see you next time.